Shout out to USARK and all the USARK members. If you don't know what USARK is, do not be ashamed. Simply click on the third link in the description below. Go to usark.org. See what it's all about. See how you could actually protect your own collection whenever legislation might hit your backyard. You just never know. Things are changing constantly in the reptile hobby, and it's good to know when things are creeping up in your area. So shout out to Phil Goss, shout out to Vanessa, shout out to Jeremy, shout out to all the USARK supporters and teammates out there. Cannot wait to see how much we fight this year to keep our animal rights. And if you're not a USARK member, talk to your fellow keepers and just let them know what USARK's all about, and they're here to protect our animal rights. Shout out to you.
T-minus 30 seconds. T-minus 20 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
All right, guys. No Junior this week, so you get to hear me talk a lot. Be excited. Before we get rolling, let's talk Pomona Show. For the first time ever, I know when it's going on. It's going on right now. I hope you guys are there. I'm jealous I'm not seeing it with you. Enjoy the auction. The auction is always one of my favorite parts about that show. No, I lied. I like the animals too. But bringing in the new year with Vin Russo. First one, ready to go, man.
Hey, guys.
Always good seeing you. This is what? Number 6 for us, maybe number 7.
It's up there.
Get it up there, man. Every time I said that, I psych myself out. I'm like, wow, what the hell are we going to talk about? But Vin, I guess, we're just going to talk a little bit about what 26 is going to be for you. We got to have that dinner at Tinley, and we started discussing the idea of like a Patreon page. And you followed through with it, which I think is awesome, because who doesn't want to talk to Vin Russo and be a part of Vin Russo's community? I know people have probably already watched the video. We'll talk about some snake stuff, but I kind of want just to tell us a little bit about what you hope to accomplish with your Patreon page, what you're going to create for the community of people in it.
Well, in the past, every time I'd go to Tinley, multiple people would say to me, "Hey, Vin, do you have a Patreon? Oh, Vin, you should start a Patreon." And in the past, I was really busy breeding snakes, so I just simply didn't have the time to do it. So now, due to unforeseen circumstances, I have the time. So, and it hit me like a ton of bricks when all this stuff went down. I was like, shit, what am I going to do now? And I just remember people saying to me, Vin, you should start a Patreon. People are going to want to learn from you. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to do it. So, I started putting it together and asking guys like you and MJ and people that have done it about, how to do it, what to do, how to start it. And everybody gave me a lot of advice. And what I did do is I didn't want to go on other people's Patreons and copy them. Like, I don't want to know what everybody else is doing. I'm going to just do my own thing. And, it hit me hard with figuring out with all of the bloodlines of boas that I've had in the past, where did they go? So people started coming out of the woodwork and telling me, oh, I have your stuff. Oh, I have your stuff. I'll give you some back. So I look at those animals as legacy animals. And there's a lot of them. There's a lot of legacy animals out there. So what I figured was, how do we draw attention to them? How do we create a community of people that will understand what they are and their value, not as far as monetary, but as far as taking them into the future for the rest of the community later on to enjoy. So, what I did was I'm calling on all people that have purchased animals from me in the past, all people that are lovers of boa, meaning, boa constrictors. And, because there are also legacy animals that are morphs that people don't realize, I mean, think about like Arabesque boas. When's the last time you saw just a normal Arabesque boa?
Well, not to derail, but the most that I remember about Arabesque coming up in the hobby in the early 2000s is breeders telling me that Arabesques make horrible breeders. He'll fix that. So, with that being said, is there a truth that have you heard of female Arabesques not having very good reproductive rates?
Well, a lot of the pattern anomaly type snakes, there may be something in their genetic, background that makes them not the best breeders. There's a whole reason why they're not so prevalent in the wild. So, but obviously people do breed them and duplicate them. So it's not like they.
Why was that picture there first and foremost? I'm sorry, guys. What was going on?
You're okay.
Right.
Patrick's a great looking guy. I could do that all day.
I am so sorry for that, guys. I apologize. Technical.
You're all right, man.
So, and for example, like just my experience, albino boa females, they're not the best breeders either, but people do breed them and make them. So, more of a reason to keep them going, keep trying.
So I personally have always really liked the Arabesque. Maybe I like it more because I just haven't seen a lot out there, but I've always liked the dirtiness of the head. Where a lot of our patterns in boas, of course, I always joke around, are ladderback circle tail mutations. There was always just something a little sharper to me about that one that I always enjoyed, and I would like to see more Arabesque. I own two. They're both females. They're both virgins. I haven't really decided what to do with them, and I'm also not really sure if I want to start from the ground up trying to make something super long term, or just maybe play around and just see if it can do something weird with like Labyrinth or I like the IMGs, but I like IMG everything.
IMG Arabesque is really cool. I made a bunch of years ago an Arabesque leopard, which was really cool. So there's lots of cool combos, but what I'm getting at is it's also great to proliferate just the base model,
Yeah.
So which is easy to do with Arabesque because you can just breed it to a normal. It is of Colombian descent. You can just breed it to a normal Colombian, and you'll make base model Arabesques.
No, for sure. So I'm a greedy man. I can't do base model anymore. So I've been looking at for 25 years.
That's the problem.
Rude. Yeah. That kind of reminds me of, I can understand with things where like, it's localities and like, you only have a couple mutations, you're going to keep them pure forever. And, you don't have higher expectations because your limitations.
Right.
For me right now, seeing it's kind of a free for all, you can kind of mix so many different things together. Like I put a Celtic with a Key West this year, and it's probably going to maybe be the dumbest or coolest thing I did this entire year. Realistically.
You never know.
It's either going to work or it's going to make something that looks like both, or they're going to make a more reduced pattern.
Right.
I don't really know. But the one thing that Key West did me right on that I really enjoyed was adding it to IMG Jungle and Aztec. It still has that big, bold pattern, but it tightens it up and lets a little more cream show through. Right. I actually really like it more than the 3-gene combo that I've made for years that has always been one of my favorites.
Yeah. Well, again, with the legacy animals, I just want people to understand that we sometimes need to go back to basics. Let's just make straight up Celtic so that you can use them as ingredients later on. Nothing wrong with mixing them into other things, which is a lot of people are doing, mixing them and matching all these. Like you said, you put two traits together, you don't know what you're going to get. Sometimes they erase each other, sometimes they don't, but you still need those traits to do it. And what I think about is in the future, if everything is multiple genes, you're not going to know what you're making sometimes. That's happening in ball pythons right now. People are mixing 4 or 5 genes into one snake. And sometimes one gene overlaps another, and you can't tell whether or not it's there or not, or if it's expressed. And then you breed those animals, and you may combine more genes, and you have no idea what you have. So, to put stuff together to make different combos, great. Think about this with tropical fish. For example, angelfish, discus. They were made by mixing multiple different recessive and incomplete dominant traits. So what they did was, for example, like the koi angelfish, it looks like a marble angelfish with a lot of orange in it. There's multiple traits that it took to make that. But what happened was, once they got that trait, the physical appearance that they were looking for, they kept breeding two like animals to make that, and then gave it a name. So they breed true after many generations. So that's going to start happening with reptiles too, specifically boas and ball pythons. You know, I can't think of offhand of a boa that's multiple traits that has a name that you could breed true, meaning you breed it to each other and you make the exact copies yet. But it's going to get to that point. But in the future, you're still going to need, for example, angelfish breeders still need marble angels to make the combinations. They still need the high orange angels to make the combinations. So we're going to need these different ingredients in the future. You know, that's the morph part of the legacy animals. The locality boa part in legacy animals is keeping the localities pure. You know, for example, there's a few locality boas that I've created in the past that are almost lost the culture. They're almost gone. Because meaning nobody really bred them, or they just disappeared. I can think of like offhand Cancun boas. I only know of maybe one or two guys that have them. Corn Island boas, I only know of one or two guys that have real Corn Island boas from the original stuff that came in that Gus Renfro and I proliferated in the late 90s and early 2000s. So this Patreon is going to be put together. It already is together. I mean, it has 47 members already. People that are into this stuff and they want to follow me and the rest of the people that are doing it to see, you know, or to talk to each other and trade, you know, trade back and forth boas, especially these localities that are pretty rare. But if we can create a community of a lot of breeders that are all doing stuff like this, like I said, it doesn't matter if it's locality or morphs, then we can keep these bloodlines going into the future.
So, you know, we talk, you know, your comment about popularity and how, you know, we lost certain things along the way, locality wise, because in a sense, maybe a lack of popularity, people wanted to move that project forward. Do you think it's because it was overshadowed by the morph movement, all the money kind of coming through the hobby? Because I find localities now are probably more in demand than they were 15 years ago.
Localities are definitely more in demand now. I've seen that in the last 10 years. I've seen them escalate price-wise, popularity-wise. I don't know if the morphs overshadowed them. They may have, because there was a lot of things that people were chasing for a while. They still are. To me, the IMG is a game changer. Was a game changer. It is now. Anything IMG is cool. Anything, you know. So, you know, people were chasing that. But you're right. They may have, when people have a certain amount of money to spend every year on snakes, they may see something like a morph, whether it be an IMG or a type of albino or a sunglow or whatever, and they may overlook the locality stuff, which has happened in the past. But people are starting to really figure it out now. Now that these animals are very hard to get, you know, they're almost, some of them, they'll never come out of the wild again. That's for sure. So it's not like you can say, you know, oh, I want a wild caught Pokeground Suriname. That's not going to happen. You know, you're not going to get that. So they all trace back to my original Noah's Ark theory of, you know, the animals that, again, Gus Renfro and I picked up back in the early 2000s, like the Pokegrons, and we bred them just to each other. We didn't mix them to any other things. So now we have a specific bloodline of Suriname that's very distinct looking, and to me, I could pick them out very easily. But stuff like that, people are realizing these things are really cool looking, and they're multi-generations in captivity. They're almost bulletproof at this point. It's not like you're dealing with wild-caught snakes, you know?
No, and, you know, I agree with all that. You know, kind of going back to, you know, salmonboa.com. I remember when the Sabogas made it on his webpage. That was the first time I
Right.
think I had ever seen them for sale. You can maybe remember, but I want to say that was like a $2,500 animal, or maybe $1,200 the first year. And I think I remember by like the second or third year, those had come down into the hundreds, like maybe like $500 to $600. And
Yeah.
that always blew my mind because I was like, wow, this thing is very unique, very cool, very small in stature. But again, I think he was able to sell more hypo boas or more salmon boas and more sharp sunglows than he could of the Sabogas. And I never understood that. But now, who doesn't want a Saboga that looks like that?
Well, I'm good friends with Rich, and it's funny. Last year around this time, I was talking to him on the phone because I was visiting with Quetzal Dwyer, who's from Reptilandia in Texas, and it just so happened that Rich called Quetzal. He puts me on the phone with him. So haven't heard from him in a long time. It was great to talk to him. But I know back then that Rich bred a Saboga to a sunglow just to see what he would get. Okay. So it kind of mixed up the bloodline in a way. And I know for a fact, because I saw many years later, a woman came up to me in Daytona, and she said, "Then I bought a pair of Saboga from somebody in California, and I bred them, and they produced albinos." Well, they were probably a product of that original breeding that Rich did from a Saboga to a sunglow. So point being, it's real easy to mix something into a locality, and some of the babies will look close enough to what that locality is to pass for it. So as far as the prices on the Saboga coming down back then, all of a sudden everybody had Saboga, and what it was boas were coming out of Panama, and the hypo patternless ones, they were just calling Saboga. So I didn't want to jump on the bandwagon, obviously, because there was too many question marks back then. But I remember specifically in 2004, again, I talked to him just a second ago, Quetzal Dwyer went to Saboga Islands with permits from the Panamanian government to collect snakes for his zoo in Costa Rica at the time. And he went and collected a bunch and brought them back to Costa Rica and did breed them and sent snakes up to Cameron at Bushmaster. And that's how I got my first original Saboga. So my personal friend went there and picked them up off the ground and brought them back. So that's the only reason why I even got those. And again, the whole reason for this Patreon is to educate people on the homework that needs to be done on a lot of these localities. And through the contacts that I still have, I'm hoping that I can bring in, if some of these snakes still come out of the wild, I don't know what they'll be, because it's not like I have a plan, but I have my finger on the pulse of what may come in or what could come in. And through my zoo connections, I could get stuff from them too. And that will be offered on my Patreon to the Patreon members too. So since I'm not breeding a lot of these animals any longer, I still have the connections to still get some similar type things back in, But that's basically the Saboga story in a nutshell.
So, and this might be a dumb idea because I came up with it 3 seconds ago, but so like with dog registry, you have like AKC. At some point, I'd like to believe in the hobby, we would have some kind of norm like that, something that comes with generational paperwork. Do you think that's something that maybe within your community you can almost like start creating it as the future, true paperwork that comes with your animals to know where they came from?
I thought of that too. The only problem with it is there's a lot of people out there. It's happening now. There's a lot of people that create imposters, and if it's just a piece of paper, same thing with dogs. I mean, like I've had purebred German Shepherds and purebred Corgis, and they come with a whole list of their family tree. It's like, unless they're show dogs that are documented, winning shows, breeding, having puppies, their puppies are registered, those puppies win shows, they breed. Unless you have something like that, with evidence that that's the bloodline, it's very difficult to prove because, like I said, all you got to do is breed a Saboga to a Sunglow, which is a hypo which originated from Panama to begin with. And there's babies in there that look like Saboga, you know, that could pass for a Saboga. So very easily it could be scrutinized, or I should say people could bastardize it. They could use that paperwork to say, oh, look, I have the real thing, and they might not be. So I'm hoping that by doing the Patreon, it'll create a community of everybody knows everybody, so you can't really lie. It's like if the animals came from my efforts or people that I know's efforts, and we know that say for example they passed a few hands, but we know the people that they went through and they ended up with so and so, and I can visually look at animals and usually tell what they look like, not 100%, but if I know the background, or I could look back and see if I sold animals to such and such a person, or my friend Gus did, or whoever else. I mean, there's other people that have been doing this the whole time too. So, but yeah, you're right. It's a good idea to create like a pedigree system. I don't know how well it'll work. I mean, it might be something I could try out in the future with the Patreon.
It'd probably be in a very extensive family tree with individual pictures of every litter documented and held back for multiple generations. So if you want to refer back to one animal and see if the pattern matches kind of thing, which is a big ask, but the reality is that, in my opinion, would bring the value up of a lot of animals, take the questioning out of things, and people pay more money there for an AKC dog than they would a non-registered dog.
Than a puppy mill.
Like you said, it's, I always talk about it too, like, the reptile hobby is such a young hobby for animal breeders. So like we are kind of behind on a lot of things like what we're talking about now. So there's plenty of time that we could start doing that.
Right.
But, another thing too, like we were talking about Saboga, like, I remember also coming in the hobby and going over to a guy's house to look at his pure Hog Island. And it was this big around. It looked just like a Hog Island, but it was the biggest, beefiest boa you could have run into. And, it doesn't take a lot. We were doing the sunset stuff. I think it was PM Herps back then. I want to say was doing the sunsets, which again, by the way, beautiful animals.
Yeah.
And I used to stare at those for hours.
Yeah.
But like you said, maybe in the beginning of the hobby, people couldn't truly understand or appreciate what we were doing because we didn't know what the fuck we were doing at that point because we were so new.
Right. Yeah. And the hogs are a great example because those were almost lost to culture. But luckily I had a couple of years where I made, 4 or 5 litters of them in a few years in a row. And I got to, spread that out because prior to that, they were really hard to find a pure hog. I mean, all it takes is to mix it into, one separate bloodline once. And like you said, those sunset hogs, well, sunset boas we call them. You can make a normal non-hypo from those that looks pretty good like a hog, So a lot of those got scattered into the wind, and that's the whole reason why a lot of hogs are not real hogs. So here's a great example. The hogs I was breeding, and luckily I just got some back from my apprentice Kenny. They were small snakes. They were 4 feet, maybe 5, maybe. And older snakes too. They were, some of my older breeders that had 6 litters in their life were barely 5 feet. Again, I'm mentioning Quetzal again. Quetzal and Dwyer and Dave Kaufman went to Hog Island last year, and they did a YouTube on it. And the biggest boa they found was maybe 3.5 feet, maybe 4 feet. So they're not a giant snake. They don't get big. They live on an island where there's just enough food to sustain their population and procreate, and that's it. So again, I'm hoping with this Patreon that people will join and understand these things and these little tidbits of information that I'll be giving out every month on how to keep these snakes, how to keep them pure, how to keep them going into the future, you know, the legacy of multiple breeders, pioneers in our industry to keep that going, you know.
So, and again, this is a lot of work, but you know, I really like the idea of all this. And again, you may have already done this, but have you ever written anything about what true feeding schedules in the wild are for certain localities based on seasons to tell breeders what they should be feeding these animals during the course of their year?
No, I haven't really written much about it, but that'll be part of the courses that I'm going to be doing on Patreon. You know, and I'm not going to divulge the secrets here because I want people to be members. But, you know, one of the things in the past, and this is something you have to think about when you're running a business. I didn't want to divulge a lot of these secrets because I didn't want to create competitors in a way, which sounds, you know, bad, but it's business, you know. Now that I no longer really have that business, I feel that it's my responsibility to help others breed these animals, you know. So part of the Patreon will be learning on how to breed these snakes. So that, you know, my secrets on what I've done in the past with every specific locality, and even believe it or not, every specific type of morph. Because a lot of morphs originate from a specific locality, which people don't really remember, you know, but they do. So, you know, those are things that I'm going to be going over with my Patreon members as time goes on. And, you know, the people that are paying the higher price to be the one-on-one members, the apprentices, I'm going to call them. Those are the people that are going to be on the you know, phone or video chat with me once a month. And we're going to be going over strategies for them to breed specific types of snakes, whether it's a locality or a morph.
So, you know, I've always enjoyed the morph origin stories, and that is probably one of the most common questions I get, even on Morph Market at the show, is they'll look at a Colombian mutation on my table and say, is this pure? And I just have to break it to them. It's been a long time, if ever, we've had any pure, true lines of a mutation that's been kept pure Colombian. Like you said, the Panamanian hypo, the orange tail stuff, like the moment that was bred into anything from there on forward, nothing has been pure.
Right. Yeah, everything's been mixed and matched, everything, you know. So, but there's still, you know, there's still little things to do to get your animals to breed that come from specific places. So if you have a morph that has a lot of Central American blood in it, there's little tips and tricks you can do to make them breed. If you have a morph that has a lot of Colombian blood in it, there's other tricks to do too. So those are the little bits and pieces that will be divulged as time goes on to the members. And again, I want to create members that are coming in, and you know, I'm also going to work on a Discord. There's a girl named Aurora who's going to help me out with that. I met her in Tinley Park, and she's the only person in the whole industry that found the missing page in my book, my last book, meaning the book was printed and a whole page was not printed. It was completely missing. I didn't catch it. The editor didn't catch it. The people printing the book didn't catch it. The publishers didn't catch it. This girl caught it. She emailed me and said, "Hey, Vin, you realize there's a whole page missing?" I'm like, "No way."
Yeah.
But anyway, she's going to help me with a Discord. So again, we'll create a, you know, the people that will be paying for the middle tier will be doing a group chat with me once a month also to discuss all these things. It's
very cool. I was at Jeff Galewood's house and we were talking Hog Island or Hog Nose, and he just got the new John Barry book in. You know, he had helped a little bit with some of the stuff in there, but we were flipping through and I think we found 4 blank pages just randomly throughout the book. Like you said, something that made it through the editors, something that got unnoticed. We saw the first one, we kind of chuckled, and we got like 3 or 4 in. We were still chuckling, but yeah, I think he was just going to add pictures to those pages. But so another, you know, there was a while ago where I really, you know, problem is I've talked about Patreon forever. I'll probably never do it. Not as in be on anybody's, but maybe never have my own. But, you know, like you said, getting inspiration from other people who've done it and like one person I talked to, he made the comment he'd like to wake up in the morning and just kind of say something to the group, kind of provoke conversation in the day, check up on it every once in a while. Again, talking back to like when you should be feeding these animals, you could have like a morning reminder like, hey, Croc, hey guys, we're feeding today. Don't forget.
That's exactly what it's going to be like.
Yeah.
It's already, the first the first part of my series is it's going to be like, it's going to be like I'm the teacher, so to speak. And we're starting with the basics of boa taxonomy, and we're starting from the north and working our way south. So the most northerly boas are boa sigma, which start with Sonora Desert, Tarahumara, and we'll work our way down. But we'll work our way a little east where there's Tamaulipas and Cancun, but those are boa imperator. So yeah, we're going to start with, all right, what do we have to do to breed that specific locality? What goes on with their little, tips and secrets on how to get them to breed.
So, I just saw him pop the RGI on there. I was talking to Ben the other day, and he made a comment that they're very close to sequencing every ball python mutation there is at the moment, and they are moving into newer things to do with their time. I know I've talked to Warren Booth about this in the past, but RGI, I would believe, could look at some locality stuff we have in the United States now and say if it's pure or not based on testing of the sheds, maybe.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. So, because like I said, I know some of their times going to be put into retics. I know some of their times going to get put into hog nose boas. I talked to them the other day about a couple projects. Boas, of course, are going to move into boa mutations. We should have stuff for that pretty soon, which I'm excited about. Sorry, I just ate breakfast and he wants that. Like you said, going back to the purity thing, if RGI could be a tool for dwarf boa breeders or just locality boa breeders in the future, that could again come with the pedigree we talk about.
Right.
Yeah. People, bastard. The comment you made before too about some of these mutations that are being made, we have so much stuff in them that you don't even know what's what anymore. You're kind of making guesses, and RGI is going to take the guessing out a lot of that, which is cool. But I think the one thing I've always said about that is, if I can't see it though, is it really worth more money? It's nice to be able to let the customer know, yes, these 4 extra genes are in there, but if it's not doing anything cosmetically to the mutation, how do you charge more for that other than just, it's like back in the day when we bought a white ball python in hopes of our leucistic having pastel and pin and spider in it and maybe some other things. It was a gamble and we were all about it. I don't know. That was a tangent. I think that was a positive and a negative RGI right there. But yeah, like I said, with them moving into new projects, filling their time with new things that they can do to help the hobby, I think that'd be a great conversation to have with Ben. That could be something his team wants to jump on and, start the pedigree.
Right.
But I'm trying to think other, usually we could segue into something fast, but I just talked for so long. I have nothing to segue off of what I said. So you have been teaching bonsai for how long?
Probably 30 years.
All right. So I imagine certain things you've done with that, as in just the way you pass information on to people, that's going to be very similar to what you do with the boas.
Oh, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's exactly what I'm going to be doing. I mean, again, in the, I called Kenny my apprentice, and a lot of people know who Kenny is because he'd go to shows with me. And, when I was real busy at my old warehouse, he was there working with me since he's 16. He's 26 now. So as far as an apprentice, I was an apprentice of a bonsai master.
Yeah.
And the way I got into being the apprentice was my father is a bonsai artist. He and another friend of his were apprentices of a master, a Japanese master named Yuji Yoshimura, and another one named Frank Okamura. So in the 60s, they were taking lessons from these bonsai masters that came from Japan and were teaching bonsai here in New York, at the New York Botanical Garden. as a young boy, I met my father's friend, who was, again, he was an apprentice also, but he at that point moved up to not master but teacher. So I became the apprentice of my father's friend, and that was in the early 90s. And I would help with the classes, like when my master would have bonsai classes. I would get there early, sweep the benches, and help out and clean up later. And it was like his, his sidekick apprentice. And then eventually he started what was called master classes, and that's how I got the idea for this Patreon. Even though that's not an uncommon thing, there's whole things online of master classes for anything. But I figured, all right, if I was in master classes as a bonsai apprentice, why don't I start master classes now as a boa breeder? So, and then as time went on, I became a teacher in the master classes when my master himself retired and moved to California. So I started teaching, and from there, but here's something that people don't realize. When you're an apprentice and then you become a teacher, you don't become a master for a long time. Like in Japan, they take that very seriously to be called a master. Even in Japan, even the master has a master. So I'm not going to consider myself a master of boas. That's just based on opinion, even though I don't have a master, because this is such a young industry that, I may have people that I learned from in the past, and again in the boa world, but as far as there's nobody before me that I could say is, oh, that guy is the master, but in bonsai, to become a master, you're an older man, so and later on I became a teacher, and I also became a student of another master. So it's a never-ending learning. And that's, I think, that's how I'm going to treat the boa Patreon. It's never-ending learning. I learn something every year. I learn something new every year about boa breeding, and I've been doing it since I'm 15. I'm 56. So again, I'm glad you brought that up, because that I'm going to be treating this like my bonsai masters treated, my classes. It'll be a very similar dynamic.
I think that's awesome. Like I said, I figured with you teaching in the past, especially in that area, you would translate that into what you were doing now. That's one thing I told people, like, I mentioned, like, when I had my own little collection, I had like a room of animals, 2 rooms of animals at most. And then Ben passed away, and I go to his place and it's 1,800 animals. And, my comment with that was, thank God the first like 8 years of my life were working in factories, because I understood assembly lines, what it was to do mass products. And honestly, I was able to translate that in what I was doing, to where when I moved into that larger scale overnight, it wasn't like, it was a little easier, I guess. Like, I was already ready. I understood how things work. Like, I wasn't freaking out as much. I understood, okay, I do all this, go back, I do all that, I go back, I do all that. And then I start the process over, kind of thing, But no, that's really awesome, man. So when we were on the phone the other day, I brought up that friend of mine online was asking about lipstick albinos. He was trying to find some animals from that project. He was hoping maybe that was something I had. And, we kind of talked a little bit about the history on the phone. You want to pick up where we left off on that?
Yeah, I was really good friends with Tom, Tom Burke. Tom Burke started the lipstick line of albinos. And, I met Tom in 1987 when he came into my reptile store to buy mice to feed his boas. He was breeding, back then, he was breeding rainbow boas pretty prolifically, too. But Tom was the type of guy who was very exact and disciplined, and he was very strong on the feeling that, it bothered him later on in life that people were calling anything nice looking albino a lipstick. And he was adamant of the fact that the only lipstick the only snakes that could be called lipstick were snakes that came from a specific pair of boas that Tom had. He had a hypo het albino that he had gotten from a guy in New Jersey, and he bred that to a really nice looking albino that he had raised up, and that pairing made the lipstick boas that Tom called lipstick. That's it. So I remember him being adamant at a show, I think we were in Daytona, and telling somebody, it's not a lipstick unless it came from that pair and it came from me, or you raised a pair of boas from that pair and bred them together and they are lipstick. So I guess what was happening is people were abusing the name lipstick, and then they said lipstick line. Okay. So I think you'd be hard pressed to find a snake that's F345 from Tom's lipstick, because not too many people, again, keep the bloodline pure. You know what I mean? They've mixed them into other things and then call them lipstick line. So again, I'm not knocking anybody who's got something they call lipstick, but they should get it right and say these are lipstick origins. You know, they come from lipstick origins. But as far as being a lipstick boa, Tom called them lipstick boas. He didn't call them lipstick line, you know?
Yeah. And I always remember that back then, you know, the same thing. It had to come from one pair. And, you know, I remember having many discussions in the boa community about that. And I totally understand that if there's, you know, pastel lines today are kind of thrown around where, you know, I do a lot of red rum where I'd like to mark every animal in my litter red rum. They're not all going to be red rums. And when I start moving IMG and other things into it, it makes it even harder to understand if that pastel could ever even show through properly. So I'll say lipstick, or not, I'm sorry, I'll say red rum lineage, so on and so forth. But, you know, with the pastel line stuff, I think that's very common in the hobby too, where just because it was on one side, they mark all their babies that way. And that's just not the way this stuff works.
Right. And, you know, again, with Tom passed away 2021. And when he did pass, his daughter and his son were left with the task of selling off his collection. And a good friend of mine who lived near Tom helped them out. And at the end, when they sold everything off, what I'm getting at is I'm talking about these legacy animals. When they sold everything, there was 4 snakes that Tom had set aside that were important to Tom, and they were 3 of them were hypo. Well, they were all hypo. No, 3 of them were hypo. 2 of the hypos were his Nicaraguan T positive line, which people call Burke T positive. They were T positive leopard hypo. And one of them was a hypo het T positive het leopard. So there was 4 snakes, and my friend who helped out Amanda and Tom Jr. to sell off the snakes, he ended up getting those 4 snakes. That was 2021. Luckily, he bred them last year, so he's a good friend of mine, and he you know, made an offer for me to buy the litter. So I ended up getting the litter from him. What I'm getting at is these are, to me, are true legacy animals, even though they're crosses, because he used a T positive from Nicaragua and a leopard from the Sonora Desert way back when. He thought that project was important enough for him to set aside and be like, and this was before he died, obviously, to be like, these could be cool looking snakes one day. So, for example, this litter of snakes, I'm obviously going to pick a bunch for myself, but the rest I'm going to sell to my Patreon members and put them on my Patreon eventually once I feel that the weather's warm enough and they've eaten enough and they'll be ready to go. But this is a great example of a legacy animal. It's Tom Burke's legacy, just like the lipsticks were Tom Burke's legacy. These are something that he did hoping they'd be really cool looking, and he was right. They're really cool looking. A hypo T positive leopard is unbelievable. I mean, they're like glow in the dark, blazing orange and red, and the beautiful leopard colors. and the T positive purples all over them. So that'll be like a project that I'm hoping that the Patreon members will take into fruition also. But this is, again, a perfect example of Tom Burke's work, and he's gone now. So other people have to do it, you know?
So, and I like the way you put it, legacy animals. Because like I said, I'm a nerd for the past. You know, I do believe in holding on to things and not letting things get lost.
Right.
So I think that honestly is a great way of putting it. You know, even in Ben's passing, like, you know, I guess arguably I always kind of wondered what that legacy animal was going to be. That one thing that, you know, maybe his name could get attached to and would always be there.
Right.
To be honest with you, I always thought the T positive anaconda project was going to be that, something that it would just always have his name attached to it.
It should be.
What was that?
It should be.
It should be. I do agree with that. But no, like I said, and the way the hobby is, you know, the older the hobby gets, the more people we lose. And I mean, we lose young people as much as we lose older people in this hobby.
Right.
Nowadays. You know, I had two guys my age pass away within just a couple of years of each other, and they were two guys that I put most of my time into talking when I was on the road. So you really never really know. And yeah, it'd be nice to attach something that is just always there. It could be recognized. You know, people can Google the name if they want to know who the person was. But you know, like I said, that's always been kind of an important thing for me. But you know, I don't really have anything I've left to remember anybody by yet. I got to figure that out still.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I would say every single boa locality and bloodline I had, and I'm trying to get back, has a legacy. Every one of them. Every single one of them. Whether it goes back to Lloyd Lemke, for example. Lloyd was a West Coast California man who sold reptiles, was a wholesaler and a breeder. And I got a bunch of stuff from him in the past. So, you know, if it's got his name on it, those are animals I kept to each other and called Lloyd Lemke line. For example, I had Brazilian boas, which thank God a good friend of mine has some of those left from that line, and he's going to give them back to me. You know, Gus Renfro, Rio Bravo Reptiles. He's retired from snakes, but he retired back in 2012, and a lot of his legacy animals are out there, and luckily I proliferated a bunch, and they're out there still. So I'm hoping people in the Patreon will be joining just to be part of that, because they will have animals that go back to him. Even Tom Crutchfield, there's a bunch of bloodlines that came into the country via Tom. They have his name on them. There's you know, a northern Brazil boa that Tom brought in years and years ago. So again, legacy animals. These are animals that represent a look, an era, a time in history when snakes were coming out of the wild, not on a very regular basis, but they were coming out of the wild, and they had a specific look to them. And we just don't want to lose that look, you know? I mean, right behind me over here, that's a Pacalpa boa. That almost got lost to culture, and the few that are left out there have some other mixes in them from other supposed Pacalpa boas, but stuff like that needs to be proliferated and called Rio Bravo Pacalpa boa, or Pacalpa boa with origins to Rio Bravo, which is Gus Renfro. And again, there's not a lot of legacy names because not a lot of people were bringing in snakes back then. So we need to keep those lines going. And it's the same with these morphs. I mean, we need to keep the Tom Burke stuff going. We need to keep the Brian Sharp albino. I mean, how cool is that? The Pete Call albino. Try and find a Brian Sharp albino that's just Brian Sharp albino, nothing else. It's not a lot, you know? They got a lot of mixing in them.
No, you know, I really do. I agree with all that. You know, my collection's always been ever changing because I'm just so obsessed with the hobby as a whole. You know, there's a species from every continent I would love to keep at some point. And, you know, where I like all the Australian species, which I always have, you know, it'd be nice if I could just have everything Nick Mutton line. Right. You know, Craig Trumbauer, great guy in the hobby. You know, I know he's still with us, but he's another guy that it'd be nice to be able to say some of my colubrid projects are Trumbauer colubrids. Right. So, you know, a lot of the way I'm trying to build smaller groups for the future that I want to work with is going to be based on the breeder I get it from, the lineage it came from. I think that's important. I think that's something that a lot of people will keep in mind when they're buying these animals in the future. I think it, I don't know, I think it puts them on a little higher tier is the way.
Right, right. Yeah. If you've got provenance to a specific breeder, and again, you know, I don't consider myself a pioneer in this industry. There's guys before me that did it. But I do consider myself a pioneer in the boa part of it, because not a lot of people kept the bloodlines as pure as long as I did. So I feel that I'm responsible in helping keeping them going further, you know? So, and like you said, you bring up names that are out there. There's not a ton of them in the boa world, you know? Look at colubrids. You've got, again, it's not a lot of in colubrids either. Applegate, Trumbauer, Lloyd Lemke was colubrids too. You know, try and find something that goes back to those guys that hasn't been mixed and matched is going to be difficult in the future, you know? So that's a whole nother part, you know? Why not do it in all aspects of herpetoculture, you know?
So I brought this up before on the podcast, and I may even have brought it up to you, but you know, we did a podcast with Graziani probably about 5-6 years ago, and he told us the story of the first pastel that came in the country, why they labeled his Graziani and why they labeled Kevin's pastel, which I always thought because the lemon pastel was just brighter. I meant to say lemon, not just pastel, but
Right.
I always thought, oh, lemon's on the title. Well, visually in my head, this looks more yellow. I guess that's why they did that. But the reality is they sat down together and said, we both may have the same thing. Let's figure out who has what line, or kind of decipher the two. And
Right.
the reason I bring that up is the one story he told at the end of that was he still owned that pastel male, and he still owned the original female. I think it was Togo, might have been her female's name. She was like 26 years old.
Right.
And he had bred them together that year to essentially make that first clutch again, like the most authentic clutch of pastels. And I was like, holy shit, this sounds amazing. And that's when pastels were $20. And I was like,
Right.
I'd pay $300-400 to be able to say I own one of the originals, you know?
Well, that's why I said to you in the beginning of our show here, sometimes you have to go back to basics and just make the plain Jane model. You have to, you know?
Yeah.
And you disagreed.
Well, it's not so much that I disagreed. It was more that, you know, my generation, you know, I guess the way I put it is my mom probably took a lot of Tylenol. I got ADHD. I want to like mix colors. I want to be crazy. I have a very short attention span, even though maybe I don't. I think it's just, you know, the way I always tell people, for me as a breeder, in high school, I was an artist. I wasn't the best painter, but I could draw. Like there was just a lot of artistic stuff I was great with. And then post high school, I didn't have artwork anymore. And I've always looked at mixing colors and reptiles as my palette now, and, you know, me being an artist in a sense. So I am always, again, very morph motivated, and I do appreciate the purist guys and so on and so forth. But I have always been the idea of, you know, I was a pop art kind of guy, man. Andy Warhol, Basquiat, Keith Haring. I want bright colors. I want madness, busyness. So that's kind of what my stuff is when I breed. That's, I think, where my motivations are, to be honest with you.
You know, I do the same exact thing. And being an artist, whether a bonsai artist or a snake breeding artist, you're trying to create something. And whenever I do a bonsai demonstration, as a matter of fact, I'm doing one this week for the local arboretum. But whenever I do a bonsai demonstration, I explain to people that bonsai and snake breeding is a multidimensional art form. It's not three-dimensional. It's four-dimensional. And people say, well, what is that fourth dimension? The fourth dimension, whether you're a bonsai artist or a snake breeding artist, is time. People don't realize that. Time is discipline. So you need to put the time into the animals in order to create the art. It doesn't happen overnight. So it's the same for me. It's an expression of my art by creating, whether they are a combination of genes, like I've done in the past with some of my blood boas, the hypobloods, and some of those salmon leopards, or Mother Nature's art, whether it be like a Baculpa boa or a Pokegron Suriname or a boa Monjacarta. Mother Nature created some really, really cool art that, we look back on and we're impressed. I don't want to get all spiritual on you, but a good friend of mine's a pastor. And when I was younger, I asked him, how do we know there really is a God? And he said to me, and this is something I'll never forget. Now, I'm not a religious man. I don't go to church, but I am a spiritual man. He said to me, and he knew that I was into reptiles and tropical fish and art. He said to me, why do you think that those snakes are so appealing to you? You think they just were created happenstance and they just are appealing to you for no reason? He said, no, they were created by a higher order. So as a younger person, it made a lot of sense to me that maybe there is more to it, And again, I'm not touting any religious things or anything, but being a spiritual person and an artist, why are these animals so appealing to all of us?
So the religion thing, I think everybody has a different way of like interpreting, I guess you could say, and not just as religion as a whole. I guess what I'm saying with that is, I didn't grow up in religion. I didn't know religion existed until like I started dating, and I dated a Baptist, and then I dated a Presbyterian, and I wouldn't say I started learning about religion, but I just understood, what it was or how big it was. But my father was never religious growing up. But I remember one time he brought God up to me, and the way he put it was, just the human eyeball is so complex and so intricate. The idea of something like that developing from a single cell organism just seemed impossible to him. And that was his way of, that was his translation of religion in his sense. And everybody, like you said, with the animals, sometimes you just got to find something that's relatable to somebody to compare to religion. And then that's your explanation. But, none of us really know what's going on. We just do what we do.
Just keep doing what we're doing.
Yeah. But, so are you going to, in your Patreon, I know you're going to work on the Discord side, so you can do your Zoom calls. Do you think you might do like some short format, like podcasting, maybe like, bring on a Rich Eiley where it's your members can watch the conversation? Doesn't have to be on YouTube.
100%. Yeah. Because, up until I figured out I wanted to do this Patreon, every time I go somewhere and have a conversation with somebody, I'd be like, this could be a show. I felt like a Seinfeld episode, like it's a show about nothing. No, but this could be a show. Yeah. Me just talking to guys like Ron St. Pierre or my friend Quetzal Dwyer or, anybody, Dennis McNamara, that could be a show. So, yeah, definitely. I'm going to be doing some podcasts with me and my friends talking about boas, and the past, and I'll probably even bring on a few of my scholastic type of people, a couple of PhD guys that I know of, and just talk about whether it be taxonomy or genetics or breeding or whatever it has to be. But again, I want to make it so that's just for the Patreon members, because I want them to be part of that community. I want them to be like, all right, this is something special. This isn't just flub. And, I have a YouTube channel too, but I'm not a YouTuber. I'm not going to get a cameraman and a producer and a director and an editor and, put together all these fancy videos. They're going to be basic videos that are just going to say, this is what we're working on the Patreon. If you want to join, come on board, so to speak. So, but yeah, I'm definitely going to be doing some podcasts with friends for sure.
Yeah, like I said, creating a space, giving people their money's worth, just having a lot of different things. That was something I always thought about if I was going to do something Patreon wise. Like, I understand the reasoning for doing YouTube. You're going to have a larger exposure. You can then start talking about sponsorships and things like that. But, I would actually be just as content having 40 people that want to watch an episode with me once a week, and I'm just their network kind of thing. And that would be fine to me. And I put that kind of thought into it. But like you said, me and you have done thousands of podcasts because we've had 1,000 conversations in the industry. And, Forrest Fanning's the reason, I got into it. He told me about what MJ was doing with Unfiltered, told me I would love it. I'd have a great time. And we set it up and I think that podcast went for like 3.5 to 4 hours and we just didn't shut the fuck up.
Right.
And some of it was having conversations we hadn't before, but just rehabbing them on that. But, even like when we were on the phone yesterday and we were trying to talk for more than 5 minutes, I was all like, stop. We'll do all this tomorrow when we're on the podcast. There's no reason to waste a good conversation because you could sit on the phone for hours doing exactly what we're doing right now.
Right.
That natural feel to a conversation, like I said, not an interview.
Right.
But no, Rich Al, I was lucky enough to have him and Warren Booth on for that episode. And honestly, I've been meaning to get back with him since because I wanted to do another one. That guy can talk for hours. I love the conversations. I love the history. I had no idea just his journey through the hobby, talking about his time in Canada, talking about having a portable bus with all these reptile enclosures on. He was taking them to place and like the pet stores he worked in, the building the boa collection in. As much as we talked about, there was stuff I would have loved to have heard more details in those conversations.
Right.
And we talked on the phone yesterday, Noah, a guy that brought a lot of mutations in from Africa, a guy that, has all these amazing stories that I would have loved to have had a conversation with. And I found out yesterday he had passed away. And, maybe that's greedy that I put it that way, but, there's a lot of people in the hobby I wish I would have had more conversations with, even people I knew for years after they pass away. Like, you just don't know.
Yeah, and again, that's the whole reason why I'm doing this Patreon. It's like legacy animals, think about, you talked about Noah. Noah was the guy who was bringing all the weird ball pythons in the, I guess, 90s, late 80s, early 90s into almost 2000 were coming from Noah. Noah was in Africa going to these collectors that were collecting eggs and hatching them out and picking out all the cool stuff and selling it for big money to American breeders. If it wasn't for a guy like that, you wouldn't have the albino ball python. You wouldn't have the pied ball python. You wouldn't have all the stuff. Who knows? It may have just gotten overlooked. I don't know. But it created an industry, So,
I think overlooked is probably the way of putting it. And the reason I say that is going back to the Potts brothers selling the first Aztec to a teacher and 9 years later getting it back and realized they had a mutation 9 years prior.
Right.
Like there were certain things. And, I think I've even heard stories where like Jeff got what looked piedish looking boa one time. He has an old Polaroid and I think he sold it for a few $100s back then just to somebody who wanted a kind of weird looking animal. And like, there's just honestly most boa origin stories, the Russo red showing up at your brother's pet store kind of thing. Like, these things slip through the cracks. And at one point in the hobby, we weren't looking for like those small details. Right. But again, the Aztec was not a small detail. That was a big, bold pattern and it didn't register in the person's head.
Right. Yeah. A lot of this stuff was hiding in plain sight.
Yeah.
Literally.
It's funny because, when that's the one cool thing too. And, you've worked with a lot of different species over the years, but, I always tell people that like, you kind of have to customize your breeding for the species because every species works differently on how we're passing these genes along, passing lineages around. Mm-hmm. So like, when we talk about, man, I lost my train of thought with that lead up, but I guess kind of what I was going to say is like, when I look at blue tongue skinks, I don't have a lot of mutations, but I have a lot of line bred traits that bring out different colors. And I'm trying to, one, make my oranges more orange, my reds more reds, but I'm also then putting my oranges with my reds to see if I can maybe make a mushy color in between and maybe take that to another position, like crested gecko breeders did for years. So, everything has to be treated differently. I remember what my point was going to be. So, like, when you look at ball pythons, man, like, I remember, I think it was like Gulf Coast, maybe, like, I hope I'm right about this, but I think Gulf Coast proved out the first super vanilla. And he had mentioned to me at Daytona when I was at his table that his wife picked out a ball python out of a bag that had a little blushing on its head. That was it. And they put it to the side, and then they got the super vanilla. I don't think we're quite there yet in boas where we're going to be able to pick out these very small characteristics that can turn anything crazy like that. Because, again, not all species work the same.
Right. Well, you know, it's the same story with the Russo leucistic. You know, I didn't name it Russo. Greg Graziani did. And you know, you were talking about how Greg had the first pastels. He and Kevin were the first guys to make pastels. The very first het leucistic ball python that I got was a bush baby that I got from Kevin. So it was a wild caught snake, and I thought it was a pastel because it was really yellow. It wasn't, you know, like the original pastels were orangey looking, you know, but this was like a yellowy, more yellow and black type of snake. And I remember calling Greg and saying, I think I got a pastel too. And that was in the 90s. That was in, I'm trying to remember the dates. It goes back so far. Probably 96 or something. 96, 97, because Greg had made the pastel already. And we were comparing notes, and I ended up breeding in, I think, 2000, a pair of these, I call them lemon balls. And I made the first leucistic. And Greg, I ended up giving Greg a het, and he bred it to a Mojave, and we made more leucistic. So he deciphered my leucistic line from others as Russo, you know. But it was the same thing. It was just a normal ball that was a little more yellow than a normal ball. You know, yeah. Who would have ever known? It would have been, you know. Now we know it's the Russo leucistic, and to me that's a legacy snake too, because when friends of mine found out that I was looking to get some of my old bloodlines back, I told a lot of people I'm not doing ball pythons again, but if anybody's got my original het leucistics or leucistics, I want some back. And a good friend of mine locally, unbeknownst to me, I completely forgot about it, but I literally gave her a het when she helped me at a show here on Long Island, and I gave her a leucistic when she helped me at a different show here on Long Island, 2 different times. I completely forgot I ever did this. It was probably 10 years ago or 7 or 8 years ago. I forget. And when all this stuff went down, she came to me and said, Vin, I got a pair of your ball pythons. I'm giving them back. I'm like, what are they? Oh, a het, original het, and a leucistic. So untainted, meaning they look exactly like the original hets that I started with from Kevin in 1996. And a leucistic. So that's the only pair of ball pythons I have.
That's fair. It's a good pair to have, man.
Yeah.
You know, I have this project here that my buddy in Buffalo, Bill, had bought from Pro Exotics, I want to say in like 2009 or 2010. And they were calling it a Pro Exotics wide line or wide stripe. And, you know, the original female is kind of interesting, but, you know, I remember back in the day, he bred it to a Mojave. The Mojaves came out all stripy and funky and reduced pattern on the side. I think he sold them for a couple $100 at the Rochester show or something like that. Then he bred it to a yellow belly, held back a yellow belly, and now I have those animals. I have the original Mojave male he held back. I have that original female I got from Pro Exotics, and I have a yellow belly Pro Exotics wide stripe. Now, of course, I always tell people if you're going to prove a new mutation or do anything with anything new, you got to get into some recessives. So I've bred that original Mojave back to the original mom and, you know, made some more pinstripey, I guess you could say, Mojaves, and I'll send you pictures after. So this past year, I took one of those pinstripe Mojaves and bred it to a clown because I thought maybe that could be the super form. I was so reduced. Well, he ended up reproducing himself exactly in that super pinstripe compared to where his father was a wider stripe for that project. Then I bred a tri-stripe to the one, and half the babies came out looking visual tri-stripes. And then I bred a puzzle to the other one, and it made 2 babies that came out looking visual tri-stripe. Now, P and tri-stripe, I don't think it has anything to do with each other. I breed them together. I would have made some tri-stripe looking animals if it had anything to do with the lineage being in there maybe. But it's throwing me for a loop. It's very confusing. I have no idea what's going on right now. I'll send you some pictures later. It's not the most exciting thing, but, you know, now there's not many of these animals out there because, you know, Pro Exotics had their fire in 2011. And, you know, I know a couple people probably acquired some of those animals depending on if they sold any. I think some people may have renamed them to Harlequin because I think my buddy in Buffalo even started calling them Harlequin at one point.
Right.
But yeah, I literally have just these 3 founder animals, or 1 founding female and a couple of her offspring. And, I'm dinkering around with it a little bit for fun. It could be nothing, but it's doing something. I just have no idea what's going on.
It's a great example, again, of these legacy animals. If every breeder keeps 1 legacy going, that's thousands of legacies. You know what I mean? Again, every snake in your collection, unlike the collection I had, which were all legacy animals, and will be again once I start ramping it up again. But if everybody has 1 breeding pair of legacy animals in their collection, and they just keep that line going, whether it be a dinker project, that goes back to Chad Brown, right? Pro Exotics, you said?
Yeah.
I mean, that's how it's done,
No, I agree with that. And I will say one thing. I think that's probably the one thing I'm the saddest about my time in the hobby, because I mentioned I started buying in 2002, and my life changed so many times along the way, moving from state to state, getting by in factory jobs. There are a lot of animals in my early days. I wish I still had something to show for it, some kind of lineage, maybe something I would have at least held on F2, F3, F4.
Right.
I'll be honest with you, I don't have that. And I mentioned, the Burke lipstick that I picked up, the albino, was kind of like one of those big deal animals. I picked up a really nice salmon from Rich Hiley around that time. I don't have lineage from either of those. And, that bums me out. Life did what it did. I had a downsize, upsize, downsize. But yeah, if there was a little more consistency to my life, like you've been able to have in reptiles, there's some stuff from back then I should still have, would still have, unfortunately don't have.
Well, that's the whole reason why a lot of this stuff literally gets lost to culture, because I don't know a lot of guys that have been doing this as long as I have. I know literally a few, so it's like a lot of people get into the hobby because, some of them get into it just because of the money part of it, which is, one of the moving forces of this hobby. But then the sad part is when they realize they're not making as much as they thought they would, they kind of just drop out and just sell everything off and they get out. So, I'm hoping that the Patreon will create. No, there already are members on there now that I know have been doing this a long time passionately, and that's what you need to do. I think the passion of other like-minded people around you is what proliferates your hobbies and your passions. So, and also the discipline of seeing others doing it too helps also. I think when you stagnate and you don't get involved with other like-minded people is when you kind of lose touch. Also, again, everybody's lives change. You get married, you have kids. I mean, there was a point in my life, I play in a band. You can see the guitars back there. There was a point in my life when I first had kids, I had no time to go play in a band, at all. And I had played in the band since I'm 13, 14. So the guys I was playing with before I had kids, I told them, listen, I'm not going to have time. We're having kids. So I figured, that's it. I'm not going to play again. But once my kids were in school and, on their own and, I guess once they were in elementary school, so to speak, I started playing in bands again, So it's the same with reptiles. I hear people come to me all the time, and when they were buying stuff from me, oh, Vin, I had snakes 20 years ago when I was in college, and then I got married, I had kids. He's like, I want to do it again now, and now I'm getting back to it. It's so different now. So, but I think what happens is if you keep, again, I keep talking about legacy animals. If you're going to keep the legacy animals and you have the provenance to know where they came from, try to pass them on to somebody that's going to keep them going too. And I'm hoping the Patreon will have that also, where, all right, there's some poor guy he's got to get out. He lost his job. He's moving out of state, whatever. The animals are going to go to so-and-so to keep for a while, or he's going to sell them to them and hope when he gets back on his feet, he can get more back from them, if there's anything I learned from the fire that I had, is that thank God I made the relationships I did in this industry. People like you and MJ and everybody else, hundreds of people, because when the shit hits the fan, and people realize that you're down on your luck and you're screwed in a way, they help out. And I can't tell you how many people came forward and said, Vin, I got snakes from you 4 years ago. I'm going to give them back to you. Or Vin, I bred my snakes I got from you, and I had a litter of babies from them. I'm going to give you a pair, you know? So it's that sense of community that put the light bulb in my head. Like, I need to proliferate this and keep it going, you know? And my legacy animals need to keep going. Even though I don't have them anymore, they're out there. And I just want to attract the people that have that stuff, or who want to have that stuff and want to, you know, keep the torch lit, so to speak.
So, you know, somebody who's passionate about animals, like, you know, just because of what happened to you, you can't turn it off. Like I said, it's not like, oh, like, you know, you move on in your own way. And, you know, being a teacher, helping people, you know, taking in a species and, like I said, localities that you were passionate about for years, and just helping people now, the next generation, you know, build up, create something that's always going to be there. Like I said, I love the locality scene. And my biggest thing, and I don't know if this is going to be a wrong way of saying it, but like every year I was 1 year away from buying a ton of boas from you. I was waiting for that one good year so I could do just well enough where I could start pursuing, picking up these things, similar to, like I said, with Craig, similar to that. And then, you know, the obvious. I don't know if there's a nice way of putting that, but like, you know, that dream in a sense kind of died because it had to be from you and nobody else in my eyes. So yeah, it's like I said, putting your time into people, I think, is an awesome thing. I've always enjoyed putting my time into people. I've always enjoyed the conversations in the industry. You know, I always joke around, like, this one semi-grown ass man came up to me at a show one time. He's like, do you remember me? And I'm like, I don't, but you know, remind me. And he's like, when I was a little kid, I took a fake mustache out of the bowl of fake mustaches on your table. And just that, him bringing that up, that made me happy. And we talked about that too. Like, you know, people coming to you and reminding you of maybe an animal you gave it to them a long time ago, and just how that changed their course in life. You know, that's kind of where you are right now. And you can continue doing that through the community you're going to create on your Patreon page. Hey,
dude, you're still in my phone as Mustache Dave.
Respect, man. If you knew me 4 years earlier, it'd be Tramp Stamp Dave. So you came in at just the right time.
Because when I first met you, you had just a mustache with the curls on it.
It was a wonderful look, man. Like I said, I love the comical aspect of it. I rocked it for 10 years, but you know, I always say I like making people kind of uncomfortable, and I'm very non-confrontational, and I think I scare people so much with my basic appearance at this point. Life is a lot easier now. And that's just me personally. But you know, another thing, going back to kind of talking about you know, sales, you know, coming in this and doing it for a living. You know, one thing too, I like to talk to people about different species is, you know, there is a reality that, you know, the ball pythons are something that it is a money-driven community, and you can hear it in the sales pitches. But when you move into stuff like locality boas, skinks, or almost any other animal that maybe you're, again, focusing on locality or keeping a purity alive, when you sell those animals, there's a passion in your sale. And your passion is what sells those animals. Right. You don't need a passion to sell an Xanthic DG ball python. It's a paint job. You're going to discuss the paint job. You're going to put up in the light so you see the shine. Like, it's a different sales pitch.
Yeah, and that's another thing we'll go over with the Patreon too, with the members is, you know, selling the animals at shows, selling them on marketing them on your website. You know, emphasizing the passion and the procreation and the keeping the legacies going, so to speak. You know, are you going to still make money? Yeah, you're going to make money at it. But you know, I tell people this all the time. I've said it probably 20 years. This business did not make me a very wealthy man, but it offered me the opportunity to make enough money to pay my bills, go on vacations, spend a lot of time with my kids, a lot. You know, the last thing you want in life is to disappoint your kids and not show up to their, you know, school play or something like that. So this business has offered me that opportunity to be involved with my family and my kids, to follow my passions, whether it be bonsai or snake breeding. But I didn't look at this business as a get rich quick scam. You know, this business, when I was 15, 16, I was breeding snakes and selling them in pet stores and saying to myself, wow, I can make some money doing this. You know, it was me creating a side hustle as a kid based on something I really enjoyed doing, you know, and then it became a business. You know, it became a factory. I literally had a factory of snakes, and it was a lot of work, you know. So what I'm getting at is, we're not selling these snakes like the ball pythons, like paint jobs. We're selling legacies in a way. You know, we're selling bloodlines. We're selling pedigrees almost. You know, that like an AKC, you know, dog compared to a puppy mill. We're also, you know, one guy gave me a very high compliment one year when I was in Daytona. He said, Vin, your snakes are like thoroughbred horses compared to the other breeder snakes. They look like donkeys and jackasses. You know what I mean? And it was a compliment to me, like, Vin, you put in enough time and effort into these animals and it shows, you know? And that was the ultimate compliment that I ever could have gotten. Not, oh, wow, Vin, you made money doing this. That had nothing really to do with it, you know? So that's what I like about this industry. And that the snakes basically sell themselves if you care for them properly. You know, if they're healthy and they look good and they've got the provenance to specific morphs or localities, you know?
Yeah, I think, and, you know, there are realities that, you know, some people have found ways to crack the code. And, you know, I do lean heavily into the ball python community on that, where, you know, some of these guys have done very well over the years. We've seen it, the early days of Brian. Like, you know, there is money to be made in certain things. But, like, it's a very aggressive part of the industry when it comes to you having to reinvest. I always say, like, you know, a boa project is like a long-term investment in the stock market. A ball python is day trading. Like, like, it just happens fast. And you have to understand that you got to be prepared to put a little more in every year. Where with boas, we can just hold stuff back for a couple of years and be in not the exact same place, but in a very good position.
That's a great analogy. It really is. Because, you know, boas to me are, you know, long-term investments. You know, ball pythons were day trading. I mean, if you, that's what the problem with the ball python breeders is. They're depending on making that next big thing that they could sell for $20,000, $30,000. Being a boa breeder, they're really, you know, if you think back, all right, Pete Call made some serious money on the first albino boas, which was a very smart investment for him. He purchased the first albino boas from Ernie Wagner, who he and a team of, I think, 3 or 4 other investors purchased 5 albinos back probably in the late 80s sometime. Good. Pete paid I think $50,000 for 2 albino boas in, I think, 90 or 89 or 90, I forget the dates, and bred them to normals. There were 2 males, bred them to normals, made hets, and the rest is history. But the original animals, I remember him selling, he was selling possible hets from breeding the het to het. He made albinos from breeding hets to hets, and those possible hets he was selling for $9,000 a trio, 2.1. I forget what the albinos were. They were probably 10, 20 grand each, something like that. I forget. But he made some serious money on that. But I don't recall another boa after that was the $20,000 regular priced boa. You know, like even the first leopards from Hans Winter. Me and Tom Burke went to his table in 2001 or 2, and we bought a bunch of leopards each. I think they were $1,000 each. You know, they weren't astronomically priced, but it's still, that's a lot of money for a snake. You know, even Rich Eiley's first salmon boas, I paid him $1,000 for one in 1996, I think it was, 95 or 96. So, you know, what am I getting at? The boas are the long-term investment. They're your stocks and bonds, and the ball pythons are your day trading investment. You're right.
Like I said, it happens fast, man. Like it's a move fast part of the industry, and you know, some people maybe don't realize that going in. And like I said, a lot of people that get in are successful with the species, but you know, we definitely see the largest turnover in the community with ball python breeders. But at the same time, you know, I mentioned Brian Carter had said he was going to become a part of your Patreon if he isn't already. You know, he's the gentleman that came in the hobby very ambitious about ball pythons, and now has changed his entire collection over to colubrids and dwarf boas. And he's happy, he's ecstatic, he's talking about the animals. Don't get me wrong, he was very happy about every ball python conversation we had too over the years. But you know, there's a new excitement, like, you know, it's just a breath of fresh air, I guess you could say. And it's a different, you know, it's just a different way in the hobby. Every community is so incredibly different from each other.
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of that too in the last, I'd say, 5 years, of people wanting to transfer from ball pythons to dwarf locality boas. The problem is, remember I talked about the fourth dimension, the time. You're going to need 4 years to breed those dwarf boas. In ball pythons, you needed 4 months. I'm exaggerating, but people are breeding males at what, 6 months? You know?
So this is a story, and I'm not going to name the breeder because it's not necessarily a bad thing, but just to show what can happen. I talked to a breeder that in 90 days, he got his male ball python up to, I want to say, 565 grams in locking. And I think that was, I'll even say the mutation, that was like back when clown bananas were, I think, $10,000 or $15,000. I believe it was a purchase of a clown banana. But, you know, I've heard stories of female ball pythons laying their first clutch of eggs at 18 months old. I've heard of that first clutch being as big as 8 to 10 eggs for their first clutch.
Oh,
so different.
The first time Greg Graziani bred one of my het leucistics to a Mojave, it was 18 months old and it laid 8 eggs and they all hatched.
It's wild, man.
Think about it, that was like in the early 2000s. It's more than 20 years ago. So yeah, the guys figured it out early. You know, so point being, a lot of these guys who wanted to, oh, I've got all these CB70 trays, I'll just put dwarf boas in them. They didn't have the patience. They really didn't have the patience. And where are they now? You know, I mean, so hey, I commend anybody who wants to get into breeding boas. If you're disciplined and you have the time, do it. If you're not disciplined and you're in a rush, stick with ball pythons.
Yeah, I don't think it's a bad thing to diversify. You know, I always say ball pythons are the gateway drug. It gets you in, maybe you make a little money and you put it into another species that you realize you enjoy a little bit more. But again, the ball pythons did get you in, and that does help the community as a whole. Like even Chad Halker right now, man, he's got green tree pythons. I think he's up to like 5 or 6 at the moment. And I mean, he is taking 20 pictures a day. He's sleeping next to him. I mean, he is just in love with this species. And not to take anything away from what he does in balls, he loves that too. But he's buying house snakes now. Like he's now really, and he's been a hobbyist forever. You talk to Dennis, you know about how far they've gone back in the community.
Oh, yeah.
But you know, where ball pythons really have been the staple of his business for years and just his passion, man, these green tree pythons got him hooked.
Yeah. I love green tree pythons. They're my favorite.
Yeah, I say it every time. I love the species, but I would want to be devoted to the species. I think my collection is too big to be able to appreciate a few of them. And not that I need a lot of them, but I think it's something that I want to put a lot of time into. And I think it's going to be maybe in my later years, you know, when I convince Chad to give me one of his ones where the tip of the tail is a little kinked and he can't sell it kind of deal. Yeah, I'm gonna start out with the scratch and den or dent and scratch. I don't even know if I'm
Right.
saying that right.
Right.
I've been doing really well. I couldn't even get that right. But yeah, no, in conversations like this, they really do go such a long way in the hobby because, you know, it's nice when people think outside the box. It's nice when people have been in the community for a very long time. And, I love convincing people to chase species that maybe they didn't realize they'd appreciate. I even said, like, I never wanted to work with corn snakes. And then I went to JMGs and I saw what Jeff Galewood Sr. was doing with line breeding his stuff for decades. And I said, you know what? If I was ever going to have a corn snake, it would have to be these. And inevitably I ended up getting this whole collection. Like, that was just one of those things I never thought I would touch. But man, when you meet the right breeder who's just done something really awesome with something, it's hard not to want to not be a part of it.
Again, it's that fourth dimension. It's time. If you put the time into anything, it pays off,
Yeah. And time in the hobby is everything. Like I said, there's a lot of instant gratification in ball pythons, but we have a pair of Xanthic blackhead pythons, and they are 7 to 8 years old now. And we just finally decided to pair them this year. I think I paired them a little late. I cheated. I put the ultrasound on it, and she was at like 22 millimeters before I even introduced the male. And then over the last 30 days, they went from 22 to 25, and they looked a little cloudy. And I've noticed it in boas too. Sometimes the overall color of the follicle starts changing, especially if it's going to start going the other way. I've noticed with boas, and this is something that Tony Antonucci taught me back in the day, that, as you see these follicles getting bigger, if you notice a little follicle right here drop in between the two up top, he was saying that a lot of his females, that meant they were going to reabsorb. I don't mind, I always talk about an ultrasound like it's this dirty thing in the hobby. Man, I really enjoy just having that tool around just for a little bit of fun now and again. You don't like them, though. You're old school, man. You're seasonal, your temperatures, your feeding.
I use my hands.
Yeah, that's fine. Well, I don't know why, but I remember all the palpitating videos that Ralph Davis put online, and he would count the follicles as he did it. I don't know what it is, man, but I don't know if it's because I'm too tense or the snake's too tense. I've never enjoyed palpitating. I've always just put the
most people can't do it. Most people can't do it. So again, on my
deep on that one, man, but I appreciate it. Yeah.
On my Patreon, I'm gonna show people how to do that.
So I will. So I believe I have 2 children's pythons ovulations this year. I'll send you one. We noticed it the other day. The other 2, we do need to palpitate. I've been trying to convince the girlfriend just to do it. Delicate hands, little snakes, go nuts. Again, I don't know why, because like you said, it's not a hard thing to do once you do it. But that also takes me back to refusing to pop a ball python or probe a ball python like my first 8 years in the hobby. I was begging friends to help me with that kind of stuff because I felt so uncomfortable. Now, man, I just spit on my thumb. I barely touch the thing, and those things are shooting out. I just got it down. You do the spit technique too before you do that, right? A little on the tip, and then you different. All right, that's fine. That's fine. I brush my teeth a lot, so it's not that bad.
Palpating a children's python is not that easy. The follicles are very hard to feel on a children's python because they're so small, and they're very they're not very turgid. They're hard to feel. So you might not feel much on a children's python. It's not like a ball python where they feel like marbles.
So I mentioned you before, I ended up picking up a small group of children's, like a 1.3. And anybody, what's the first advice you give anybody when they're getting in the hobby? Make sure to always sex your snakes after you buy them. You can't ever really trust anybody. Well, I've been breeding females to females for about 3 years. So I got that figured out. I got a male in from a buddy of mine. And I guess what I was trying to get at with that is last year, I thought I had a gravid children's because I held her up like a ball python. And you just saw boop, 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 boop all the way down. Those are actually probably just big follicles that built up over the season, and then she reabsorbed them. But I was very convinced last year I had a female gravid. So I guess maybe on the bigger side, they'd be easier to feel. But I guess in the beginning, probably pretty difficult.
Yeah. Once they get past a certain point, you could feel them. But they're not, for me only, they're not detectable when you need the male with them. You know what I mean? By that. So I just leave the males with the children's pythons. I just leave the males in from December on.
Okay.
They usually
And that
breed.
makes sense now.
Yeah.
I want to say my children's, because I was on the old property when I thought I had a gravid female, and she had those very large follicles then, probably around November. So this year we actually started pairing around November, and it looks like, again, 2 are sound. The other 2, they may not even have built. They might be on completely different schedules. They may be a later in the season one for me.
Right.
But even the spotted pythons, we have a couple striped spotteds, and they have been together off and on for the last like month or 2. I don't think anything's really happening there, which either means I got in way too early and it's going to be a little later on, but they're definitely, I don't think anything's happening with that pair yet.
Yeah. It's funny. A friend of mine, I gave him a pair of children's pythons like 5 years ago. And last year he tried breeding them and it didn't get anything. And he brought them to me. He's like, Vin, I think I got 2 of the same sex. And I sexed them. It was a male and a female. I'm like, I don't know why they're not breeding. And he gave them back to me. He's like, well, you can have them, after the fire. I was like, that's great, because they're from my original line. So I sent him a picture of them breeding last month, and he's like, oh, no wonder I didn't breed them. I kept putting them together. He's a corn snake breeder. He's like, I kept putting them together in March.
There,
you could have just asked me.
So again, another thing when we talk about your Patreon group and me just mentioning like waking up in the morning, reminding people to feed, I'm sure it's gonna be the same way. You wake up in the morning and say, hey, everybody who's working with this locality, you should be considering this today. It's almost their season. Like, holding people's hands through this. Like I said, boa breeding is easy and hard in my opinion. Like, it's truly easy hard.
Yeah.
Well,
I compare boa breeding to being a good chef. There's a lot of ingredients that are required, and if you miss one, it throws off the whole dish. So, and I'm not knocking ball pythons in any way, because think about it. I've been in the ball python game way before most people out there today. I know exactly how it worked and how it went down, and I did have one of the original, the very first leucistic ball was produced by me. So I know how it works. But in ball pythons, and the reason why I say I'm not knocking them is there's very few ingredients necessary to breed them. Very few. I would say there's 2 ingredients to breeding ball python. When boas, there's probably 10. So, and again, if you don't get those ingredients just right, a dash of this, a teaspoon of that, a temperature for this amount of time, you're not going to do it.
So we're all catchphrases today, but my comment I always tell ball python guys to consider is it takes just as long to make an ugly snake as it does to make a pretty snake, and you just won't know till you get there. And with boas, it's triple that amount of time that's going to go into it, that you may make an ugly snake because you just looked at it the wrong way. You put the wrong pair together. You know what I mean?
Right. And again, that's probably the reason why a lot of these legacy animals lose a foothold, because there's too much time to invest in. Sometimes people want to get the most out of that time, so they're not going to breed the two like animals to each other. They're going to try and make something different, or try to create something different.
Again, another reason why in my opinion ball pythons are a great way to come into the hobby is, like you said, the breeding part really not that difficult. Anybody I've ever gotten to ball pythons are usually able to get eggs, 50% success rate kind of thing throughout their females. A lot of them a lot better than that. My cousin Paulie got into breeding ball pythons when I moved back to Buffalo the first time years ago. And I remember he just had a few animals, and I think he got clutches out of every one of them. And, this past year he got back into them again, raised some babies up, and the same thing. He was very successful producing animals. And that's great because, you kind of need that, because how hard it is to tell people when they're buying a off your table that, realistically you should probably raise it for 5 to 7 years before you breed it. And they're just like staring at you like, so it's going to be 8 years before I produce an animal from this. And it's like, well, yeah, if you want to do it the right way, or you can get it up to size in 2.5 years, but the longevity of the animal is just not going to be there.
Right. Yeah.
So it's good to have instant gratification species while you're staring at these other projects coming up, is the way of putting it.
Right. Right. Yeah. I always tell people, if you're impatient, then get a bunch of corn snakes and leopard geckos while you're waiting for the boas to breed to grow up.
I had a group of crested geckos that in the pet store I worked in, the group just came in. It was in a bioactive. They bred and made babies. And arguably that was the first thing I ever bred in the hobby, even though I always say boa constrictors. But honestly, I didn't breed those things. I didn't take the eggs out of the container. I didn't do anything. I just would find little babies in there every once in a while.
Right.
But, it was nice in the beginning because at least there was something I was seeing, and I was using that money to buy the food I needed for the boas and things like that. And then the moment the boas started doing their thing, man, I probably just gave that entire crested gecko setup away.
That's right.
But, how are you doing on time, sir? I know you got a couple things going. I just saw you look over your shoulder.
No, I'm good.
Good for a little while. All right. Well, we'll do the always 2 hours and push a little further, but just want to make sure. Plus, I got a skink breed today. I told you that I started last night. I got 3 locks for my first day trying, which is a good day, but I got 44 females. I'm going to try to get at least 2 locks out of this year. I'm going to probably be breeding skinks every day for about 5 to 6 hours a day to get that accomplished this year.
Yeah, the skinks, when I was doing them in larger numbers, they're a lot of work. Well, I would start mine in February. You're a month ahead, but yeah, it was every day.
Well, so let's talk about that, because I talked about this the other night on a skink podcast. So when I lived in Buffalo, New York, my timeline was last meal on Thanksgiving. I put them into cooling about a week or 2 after that, once they digest that last meal. And by Valentine's Day, they should be breeding. And I did it that way for years. And then I moved to Ohio from there, and I was still able to do on that time frame. The only difference from Ohio and Buffalo was in Buffalo, I cooled them down to 50s and 60s at night, where in Cleveland, they were always at 68 to 70, but in darkness the whole time. Mm-hmm. Then I moved to North Carolina, and my season started creeping like a little earlier every year. And then 2 years ago, my first lock was on January 28th. This past year, I moved the collection late December, woke them up accidentally, and my first lock was January 8th. This year, I couldn't cool them properly, and my first lock is January 8th. And they all seem very in it. The females are wagging their tails. So my, Missouri, Ohio, North Carolina, Buffalo, New York, when I was in New York, my earliest seasons are my latest seasons. Once I got out of New York, my seasons are a lot earlier now. And where I want to maybe contribute that to being up north, there's a gentleman in Minnesota named Alex. He is already done breeding his blue tongues. They started breeding like 3-4 weeks ago, and he's in super cold climate. It's still super cold there, but he is probably the earliest guy to breed every single year, and he gets babies every single year.
Well, I compare skinks to birds. Skinks breed with increased daylight hours and obviously temperature. So there's 2 main ingredients. At least this was my experience: temperature and light. It's like the places that breed chickens for egg production. They leave them in 24 hours of light, and they just lay eggs constantly. Chickens, if you keep them out in your backyard, as soon as the days get shorter, they stop laying eggs. And as soon as the days get above 12 hours of light a day, they start laying eggs. So I think the skinks are the same way. I think once they're exposed to light, the pineal eye on the top of their head is exposed to light regularly, and the temperatures are above a certain point, probably above, say, 75, they start breeding. So it's just a matter of catching the window of opportunity. Another thing I noticed, you've probably seen it too. I'll have 3 or 4 skinks breed. Let's say I always started in February, and by March they were almost done. So let's say that February 14th, 4 females bred that day, and then I give them a day off, and then I breed them again if I can. So let's say they all bred between the 14th and the 21st. 4 of them. Fast forward to June, they'll start giving birth, and some of them will be 3 weeks apart, their births. You'd figure they'd all birth within that 1 week, but the window was 3 weeks because some of them went later, some of them went earlier, some of them were in the middle. So it's like they definitely are storing the sperm for a little while, because the ones that had their babies later in June, probably June, February, March, April, May, June, bred and stored the sperm until the eggs were fertilized, and then the gestation period took over. So that's the way I looked at them.
And so there's like a bunch of things I could say about that, just from my experiences and people talking in the hobby. But so first off, probably about 8-9 years ago, people in the hobby were writing down the date they got the lock and counting days from there until when they got their litter, which didn't really make any sense to me. The ovulation wasn't there. And a lot of people weren't catching ovulations in their skinks, so they were going based on that date. That didn't make any sense to me.
Right.
Another thing too, so I do like 1 male to 3 females is the goal this year.
Right.
I don't have enough males to do it any other way. And last year in the past, I had a male named Bam Bam. He was the most classic looking guy you've ever seen, but he was a real strong dude. I got 7 or 8 litters out of him 1 year. Mm-hmm. I've never been able to get another male to do that for me. So 1.3. And I'll take the male like yesterday, and I'll put him on female 1. And, I guess another back in the day, like there were people that put like a baby sock over the female's head, maybe a little electrical tape around the mouth to stop the female from aggressively fighting back. Well, now when you just pay attention to your animals, you realize the reason they're fighting back is because they're not in their window. Don't force them into it. You can wait 6 days, and suddenly those girls are like wagging their tail, looking over their shoulder, and just being very submissive. So, like I said, information being passed down over the years has changed, but there's still a lot that we don't understand in skinks. And the main thing is gestation periods. It seems like none of us truly know what the gestation period is.
To me, it's the same as any other animal. It's 120 days.
So,
because they do ovulate, they do get lumpy, like they do get bloaty when they're ovulating. They look like they're full. So it's about 120 days. At least that's what I counted. Again, you got to watch the animals.
Yeah, I'm going to pay more attention to those fine print. I will be honest, man. I'm not a bad breeder, but I am a bad note taker. Like, I'm not always holding on from information year after year after year on certain things. I'm trying to get a lot better at that now. But in the past, man, sometimes I'll put that tape on the side, and then there'll be 7 pieces of tape on the side from the previous 7 seasons. I could be better. And, especially with like the now where like I'm really like focusing on certain lineages and just line breeding things a certain way. I got to get a lot better about my family tree on those guys.
Yeah. Just write it down, I leave a...
Oh, I know how easy it is, buddy. It's so easy. I choose not to.
In the past, I would leave a blue magic marker on the rack, and I would write on the front of the tub the days they bred, the day that I thought she may have been ovulating, and then the days that they shed, because they do shed before they give birth, a lot like a boa or a python does. And then I would write down the birth, and then I'd put that all on a card for the next year, and 9 times out of 10 they'd be on that same schedule the next year. The skink.
So like I said, I have been very inconsistent, just even talking the cool down process of these animals over a year, and I generally feel like every year I've probably done it a little differently or had them in a different home. I think this is, I'm going to have to look back, but it's either my 12th or 13th season breeding skinks this year. And I bet you 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think I've done that in 7 different homes, maybe 8. This will be my 8th, I think, this year. So I'm like moving like every year. I'm hopefully not going to move again until I move one more time, and then I'll be done for a long time. But yeah, my just being all over the place, I think it changes. Like I said, I never would have thought I'd be breeding skinks so early. I always thought it was silly in the hobby when I saw people going at it in December and January. It made no sense. I was just shutting them down, and you're now breeding. but they're just cycling when they cycle now. Apparently, and we'll see how my success rate is this year.
Yeah, like all the Florida guys bred their skinks already. They bred them December and now.
Some, yes, with
Some.
Heather and Ron St. Pierre and guys like Manny and David.
He's keeping them outdoors, so he's at the mercy of the weather. So
yeah,
but if they're indoors, the Florida people are breeding them early.
No, for sure. And I got to look back at Ray Gurry's days because, even Ray could never truly get his room below 70 degrees when he was successful with skinks. But I remember a year when Ray had like 400 baby skinks born. Like, I think to date, that's probably the most successful anybody's been in a single season on skinks. And, I think there was some things like, he's a little different though. Like, Ray would tell me about back in his days working for bands, how he could have sex 3 or 4 times a day. And because of that, he would lock his skinks 3 or 4 times a day because if he could do it, they could do it. I usually give my guys a day off. I would have thought they'd have to recoup, but he would breed a male skink in the morning and try again in the evening, and he would be successful. And how do you argue with a guy that made 400 babies in a season?
Yeah, it's true. My skinks, I would have to give them a day, at least a day to 2 days in between. The males,
Yeah, same. Like I
yeah.
said,
I think they're shooting blanks after, if it's too soon,
Couldn't agree more. I do think there's a too soon on that. And, I always go with a lot of species. I always talk about that one lock is enough. I told you my first boa litter I ever got, there was kind of some luck there. It was one lock and it was done. I've tried skink years where I've tried to do this one lock and try to extend males onto more females. And after a few years of trying that and being stubborn, I'm not doing that anymore. But I also don't believe you have to breed them 4 times or 5 times like some people do, because I'll see some people do 4 or 5 days in a row on a female. She's beat to shit. You can see scabs on her shoulders. So this year, I think 1.3 is perfect. I've got 4 backup males if somebody's not going to do anything. I'm going to space out the locks 1 day in between. And the goal is 2 to 3 locks per female, and I've got a 20-day window to do it.
Yeah, I've always told people that purchase skinks from me, the secret to skinks is more males than females.
You could argue that with every species, though. I remember when Jeremy Stone came out with his boa video, he claimed he held back 2 males to 1 female. He always wanted the extra male.
With the skinks, I've noticed that 1 year you'll have a male that'll breed, like you were saying, 7 females, and he's great. But then the next year, he doesn't feel like breeding 7 females. So every year, a different male in the collection I had, every year a different male would take that role.
Yep.
And it was usually a male that was in their prime, because once they start getting a little older, they go downhill too. You know what I mean? They breed less. And when they're young, to get them to breed is tricky too. Sometimes the younger males don't know what to do, and they don't fulfill their needs. So I always tell people, have a bunch of different males to use, because sometimes the males just aren't in the mood.
1000% males will turn off from season to season. Sometimes age, sometimes younger ones. Sometimes a bad interaction with a younger animal with a female makes them not want to do anything for the rest of the season.
Right. A female grabs a young male, he won't touch anything after that.
He's going to piss and shit. He's going to roll out of the container. He's going to lose his mind. So I used to do the side bins, set up the bin, maybe do a light on top, introduce the animals, keep an eye on them. I now do everything in the bin they're in. I think it's very unnecessary to do the side bin. And there are some males that I need to introduce the female to the male container, but a majority of them, it's introducing the male to the female container.
Right.
But some are just so spastic, you need it in their terms and their environment.
Yeah, they're all different. Every male's different. So
yeah. I have a male, James Fenn years ago produced the white northern blue tongue. You might have seen in the magazines back in the day. Sometimes the pictures still float around. After that, a gentleman in Texas, Cohen, he doesn't know where his lineage came from, but he bred some skinks together and he made 3 of those whites in the same year, same region from Fenn, probably some Fenn animals that just trickled out. And I picked up 1 animal from that, and my ex-girlfriend Cheryl picked up an animal in Syracuse that came from one of his litters. We bred them together and made a white skink. I ended up losing the animal. There was a diet that people were working with in the hobby from a big company, and I was in the early test trials, and all my babies developed metabolic bone disease from using that diet, unfortunately.
I think I recall telling you not to use that stuff.
Yeah, it was, you know what? It was just such a good feeling to have a larger company in the industry use you for a test trial in a way. I was like, holy fuck, I get to do this with this guy? And then in the end, literally every litter that I fed the mother that diet to, I got metabolic bone disease, ended up being that animal. I have I have 2 skinks alive from that project still. 3, I'm sorry. I've got a male that looks an image of his father that ended up producing a white animal, and he has this like coffee brown tannish look to him, very unique compared to anything else. And then I have a dark lineage female that bred his father, and they're super light. Even though you can see some darkness playing through, there's still a lightness to the skink. So I think they're both hets. But the male is not willing to breed for me. He's probably 8 years old now. I got 1 litter out of him in 8 years. He's not an ambitious guy, and he is built like a tank. He looks good, strong muscles in his cheeks, scared shitless of all women.
Yeah. That's the problem with skinks. Some males are just that way.
Yeah. It's unfortunate. I would like to maybe make another white skink, even though I think that ship has sailed in the hobby at this point because there's so many of them available. But you have the time, man. I'll send you the baby pictures. It was so cool seeing that thing and actually reproducing it. Just, buying that animal from one guy, another one coming off of Craigslist from the same lineage, like in New York, and just happened to hit it. The thing we all dream of. Yeah. And I got nothing to show for it. I would have loved to have developed that a little further.
Well, I think Ron is onto something. Ron and Heather, they basically, they call them, what are they calling them? They're calling them the head albinos they're making. They're basically crosses because in Australia they found out that the pure Eastern albinos were very weak, but once they mixed them in the Northerns, they were very strong. Yeah. So Ron's got that bloodline, and what I'm getting at is I think the problem with the northern blue tongues in the U.S. today is they're sourced from a very, very small number of animals. I mean, the original animals came from Australia probably sometime in the 70s, and then some trickled in from Europe after that. But the gene pool is pretty small on northerns, with the exception of, some people have specific German bloodlines, I think. Mm-hmm. But what's happening is you've got so many generations of inbreeding that it could affect their reproductive abilities, But Ron's got those we'll call them mutts for lack of a better term that make the albinos, and those things are like bulletproof. They breed really readily. They breed young. They grow fast. They're Taliqua domesticus. They're domesticated, different locality crosses that. But I think what I mean by he's onto something is those animals are the wave of the future in a way, as far as the albino part of it. They're not a pure northern. We're purists. We're into easterns and northerns and Erie and Jayas and stuff like that. But for the pet trade, something for the future. Those
they're gorgeous. And you just said so. The history of what I've seen in the skink community is, there was a point where I-banded Easterns hit the scene pretty heavily about a decade ago. There was just, some came in from, the Victorians came in from Greenland, I want to say, a zoo in Greenland maybe. I might be mixing that up. But the point I'm trying to make is the pure side of things. The community was starting to build, and it was all about purity, knowing your lineage, pure Northerns, pure Easterns. And because most of the mutations were Eastern-based, I think a lot of people in the United States that were the purists were buying the Easterns in hopes that they had the morphs, they could move them forward with their Eastern stock. And, I think those animals at one point were like $750 to $1,200 on an I-banded Eastern, and they're still hard to come by. But you can get them for just a couple $100 now. They're not sought after. And I think a lot of it, like I said, was because of the morphs. But like you said, the Australians figured out a long time ago that you had to hybridize. So where I do like to believe that I work with pure animals, I do understand if I'm going to do mutations right away, that's going to have to be like its own little area. Its rack system
Right.
and understanding, a labeling properly.
It's the same thing when I'm doing with boas. I've had the localities, and I had the morphs. The morphs are mixes, plain and simple. And that's happening right now. We're seeing it with skinks. The morph, the albino, is a mix. It's that simple. So, at this point, that's where you keep them.
Yeah, and it's what it took to be successful with them. I mean, we've seen albinos float around the industry. I remember Ben Siegel having some in his pet store, 2 decades ago, it felt like.
Yep.
And, they passed hands 5 different times and they never bred.
Right.
I think they were both males, and I do know the males are typically weak breeders. Being, when you're a little more blind, it's really hard to find the location on the female to grab. I think that has a lot to do with it. Now, I don't necessarily think that breeding northern stock in there made them any less blind, but man, they made them strong breeders.
It did. It did make them their eyesight better. That was at least what one of the guys in Australia said on some podcast somewhere I listened to. Whether it was Joe Ball and another guy, they were talking about the original Eastern albinos couldn't see at all. When they mixed them into the northerns, those babies, the albinos they created with those, could see fine. So I don't know, and they probably don't know either what the difference was. But from what I understand, and I'm not there, I don't know, and I don't have any albinos on hand to test their eyesight, but that's what I understand. That's what I've gathered from.
All right, interesting. It could have been a Joe Ball conversation. I hope it wasn't a conversation I had with Joe Ball and you were watching my podcast. I don't remember that moment.
It probably wasn't. You just don't remember.
It probably is. Yeah, it's probably exactly what it is. But so on the albinos, and we can kind of wrap up on this. So the coolest thing about albinos in the country is our color palette with northerns in the United States is far superior than what they have in Australia. And because of that, the variety you're going to see come from Heather and Ron over the next few years, already this year, you saw the picture they showed the other day where they're holding it. That thing is like bars of I don't know, not red, but
they're red.
Yeah, red. And
close enough.
The Australians will be jealous about that. And the same thing with their patternless project they're working with. They're calling toffee. We can line breed every color mutation into that now. We will surpass what Australia can do with some things, where just for the fact that they have everything over there, they will be way ahead in other things. But very excited about the albino project in the United States. Very excited they're being successful with it. Excited that you got a couple babies. I hope those posets prove out for you, man. Like I said, I'm a skink fanatic. I believe in the species. It's just I don't know what its place in the hobby is going to be, because it had such a good peak 7 years ago, and it's leveled out to an extent now. But I don't know if it'll ever get back to where it was. I guess
I think it needs a guy like you to start a Patreon.
So, I always like doing things in teams. Maybe because, like I said, it's not that I'm afraid of computers, but I've always gone on my way to be stubborn about it. In art class in high school, I was very stubborn about Photoshop. I was very stubborn about taking photography classes. Something just bothered me. I don't know. It's just me. But so I have talked to Junior with JMG Reptiles about maybe doing one together where he can do the medical side, the science side. He's really good at breaking down genetics. He can lean into his hog nose. I could have a little group in there where I could talk boa constrictors a little bit. I can talk blue tongue skinks a little bit. I could talk ball pythons a little bit. But like I said, I've always been a teamwork guy, and I always thought if I had somebody like that to do it with, I'd do it. And where we've had a million conversations, no triggers have ever been pulled, bud. And they may never be. But you're right. It's a unique area. And I just, I get to talk to all my friends that manage their Patreon groups. And these people are having fun. They're making jokes. Everyone's just enjoying themselves. And they're all benefiting from being in this group together. So yes, at some point I should have it. But right now, I'm going to live vicariously through you. I'm glad you pulled the trigger, man. And I'm really glad you're off to such a great start.
Thanks.
But, well, like I said, I'm going to skink breed, man. We can do this for 3 hours, but I'm going to cut us at 2 today. honestly, what a pleasure, bud. I always enjoy these. Don't forget about me if you're ever doing podcasts on your network and you want to maybe bring me out as a guest. Maybe somebody
for
wants to hear
sure.
from
Yeah,
me.
yeah.
Yeah, I tell jokes sometimes. People like jokes. But yeah, no, awesome, bud. Anything you want to send us out on?
No, just if
Oh.
you're into what my
In the links, we forgot that. In the link to the podcast is for Vin's Patreon group. Click on the link and have an opportunity to become part of that community.
Yeah, follow the community if this is something you're into, and there'll be a lot more to come. That's for sure. So.
Awesome. Appreciate it as always. Everybody that's in a Pomona this weekend, please enjoy yourselves and send me some pictures if there's anything cool going on there. But I don't know if MJ's here, but we're going to say goodbye.
Peace out.
Later. No, MJ's not watching us. It's still clicking, buddy. I can't stop these things.
All right. So you want me to just X
well,
out?
We can hang out for a second while I call MJ and tell him to shut it down. But yeah, this is my biggest fear. This is why I can't do things in life. I can't even shut a podcast down. I don't even know how to do that. One time, me and the guest all left, and then somebody messaged me and said, "Hey, the podcast says it's at 4.5 hours right now. What's going on?"
It's still rolling.
Still rolling, man. But it's not going to be nearly as bad as it was last time. You know what? Just because it's only going to be awkward from here forward. If you want to leave, I'll awkwardly call MJ, and then people can experience that until it's over. Or you could just talk. I don't even give a care. But I'm definitely going to call the man.
Well, I'm just going to go grab lunch.
That's fair, man. Wish me luck.
All right, brother. Thanks a lot, man. Appreciate it.
Of course. Always, man. Later.
All right.
Calling MJ. He never picks up my phone calls.
What a great show, Dave. I love you, buddy.
All right. Peace out, everybody.